This is the Camp Iron Mountain Podcast, a place to learn about U.S. military history as told through the stories of service members, military units, and supporting civilians. Join us as we work to preserve their memories for future generations. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Camp Iron Mountain Podcast. Today, we have a fantastic show for you. Our guest today is Lieutenant Colonel Iven Sugai. Iven is an active duty Army officer who is currently in his 27th year of military service. He started his career as an enlisted soldier before earning an officer's commission following graduation from college. Iven is presently stationed in Huntsville, Alabama with his wife Courtney, who is also an active duty Army officer, and their 3 children. Before his current job working missile defense integration issues, Iven served as the commander of 1st Battalion, 5th Field Artillery at Fort Riley, Kansas. During his tenure, he led the battalion through an operational deployment to Poland. Iven and Courtney are 2 of my wife and I's oldest Army friends, and I'm excited to have him on the show to share some highlights from his exceptional career. And with that, I'd like to welcome to the show Lieutenant Colonel Iven Sugai. Iven, welcome to the show.
Hey Gabe, awesome. It's great to be able to rekindle our relationship, even though we never really lost that. But again, it's been a long time, my friend.
Definitely. It's been a very long time, but I'm glad we're able to do this. And thank you for taking the time to be on the show. Just a little background about yourself. Do you mind telling us, where you're born, where you grew up?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you know the story, but I know for those that listen to your podcast don't, so I'll elaborate a little bit. As you recall, I am born and raised in Ewa, Hawaii, so in a small sugarcane plantation in the middle of the Pacific. So interesting when I hear people talk about being in the middle Pacific. I literally grew up that way. That's where I built most of my values, and much of the influence in how I lead troops today comes from that humble beginnings on that sugarcane plantation. I moved after going to basic training. So basic training was really my first taste of leaving Hawaii and kind of opened my eyes to this love for travel that I've had. That and, growing up in Hawaii and having a father who worked for the Department of Navy and just seeing all the cool places that he got to go to inspired me to do the same, but at the same time doing what my parents have always taught me, which is to, give something back to this country that has given us quite a bit of opportunity. As you may recall, my mother moved to Hawaii, to the United States for a better life. Same goes with my dad's mother, my grandmother, back in the day, and again, to work on a sugarcane plantation and just to have a better life. And for them, being in Hawaii before it became a state was very interesting. But they just had nothing but great things for the opportunity that the family had, that I thought it was only the right thing to do. Which is to serve my country, and what better way than through the armed services. So this is something I've always wanted to do as a child. I've spent 27 years doing that, traveling all over the world to places that I liked and places that I had to go to because the Army said, this is where we need you. And, as I look back over the 27 years, to include some of which with you, and meeting great friends all over the world, all over the United States, and seeing all these things that I never thought I'd see again, coming from a small island in the middle of the Pacific. And I couldn't see myself doing it any other way if I had to do it again.
Was there a history of your family serving in the military, or were you one of the first ones?
No, I'd be lying if I said I was the first one. I probably spent the longest time in service. But I was originally inspired by my uncle who served with the 442nd, which, as you know, history-wise, was a majority Asian unit. And he went to Europe to fight against the Germans. And, of course, I've had other uncles who served during the Korean War. And I had another uncle who was stationed in Germany. But I am the only one that will have spent well over 20 years in service. But again, going back to what inspired me to join, my father would always talk about, how he didn't have an opportunity to serve for health reasons growing up, disqualifying him from service. So the best he could do was to serve as a Department of the Navy civilian, and he retired out of the Department of the Navy. And of course, with his job, I was able to be exposed to primarily Navy folks and the Marines. And it's surprising that I didn't join the Navy or the Marines and opted for the Army. But when I think about the war fighters, the guys who did most of the fighting, those were my uncles who, again, served in the 442nd.
Was he in the 100th Battalion from Hawaii, or was he a mainlander?
No, he was from Hawaii. So you sort of had the two factions, right? So even though there were all kinds of minorities, primarily they were the Japanese Americans, and most of which were what they called the Nisei, the second generation. And the two factions were the Hawaii Japanese Americans and the continental U.S., or what we call the mainland Japanese. So, my uncles were definitely of the Hawaii faction. And if you read some of the history and some of the books that have been written, it was very different, the culture, but still both very interesting in that, they served the country who was attacked by people from, where their forefathers came from, right? So it was very interesting.
Yeah. I know I did a special project my senior year in college about the internment over here, because my grandparents worked on the farms here in Northern California, worked for Japanese farmers, and they all got taken away. And so I knew early on that, I guess, the schism, since the Hawaiian Nisei, their families weren't put into camps where the mainlanders were. Definitely a great history to explore and see the folks that did step forward, even though they had the dishonor, kind of, the slap in the face of having your families put in camps.
Sure. That was you hit the nail on the head. That was the stark difference between the two factions. Not only were they culturally a little different, but the ones on the mainland U.S., right, they had to go through that slap in the face and having their farmlands taken away from them, and their family being put in the internment camps. Whereas, our families in Hawaii, they live pretty well. You work hard and you do great things, and you're able to, and, they were not the minority in Hawaii, so things were a lot different. And I know some of the books talked about that, those from Hawaii, would get care packages, and they would be just these big boxes of stuff. And that wasn't always the case for the mainland Japanese Americans, because their families were poor, because, again, a lot of their assets were just taken away from them.
This is definitely a topic I'm going to explore more in depth in a future podcast episode. Coming back to your earlier career, were you an enlisted man before becoming an officer?
Yep, so that's correct. So I started off with the Army National Guard, and part of that was it helped facilitate my transition later on to being an officer, because it was a lot easier to go to college. I think if I had to design my career early on, perhaps starting off as an active duty guy while going to school part-time was another approach. But needless to say, with the amount of training and just how how much conflict was, just in the world, we were able to do quite a bit of things. So the experience I had as an enlisted soldier, albeit in the Guard, were not too much different than, what my active duty counterparts endured as enlisted men. So, again, those are those building blocks that I drew from as an officer, was, again, from that time as an enlisted soldier.
And what was your MOS as an enlisted soldier?
So, why change out of something that you find yourself very good at? So I started off as a 13 Fox, and when it came time to transition to an officer, I said, why would I guess I could go infantry, because we support the infantry as a 13 Fox forward observer. But I said to myself that, I would stay in the artillery. It's what I love to do. I love the notion of being the king of battle. So I asked for it. Right? And of course the Army said, well, coincidentally, it's your first choice. We're going to give it to you. But obviously there's a lot more need in that branch than there were in other.
After attending the artillery officer basic course, where was your first assignment?
Oh, the beautiful 101st Airborne Division. Never fails in the Army. You ask for Hawaii, we say, I got something better for you. We'll stick you in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And clearly that was the beginning of our relationship there. Starting off with, peacetime operations, and of course that all escalated, and the rest of history. And, we all had our time with OIF.
What jobs did you have there at Campbell?
Let's see. So as a lieutenant, it was awesome. Again, having been a forward observer, an artillery forward observer, being able to be a fire support officer first was a great use of the expertise that I already had. So I actually spent quite a bit of time as a fire support officer for the 2nd Brigade strike of the 101st Airborne Division. And, from there I went to Ranger School, and in the middle of Ranger School, we went to war with Iraq. But, backing up a little, 9/11 happened, and we were sending people left and right to Afghanistan. So my wife instead went to Afghanistan while we continued to train back in the U.S. And at that time, we started to see the writing on the wall that we would also send folks to Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent my time training for that while my wife was forward in Afghanistan with Operation Enduring Freedom.
Did you move over to be a platoon leader before you went to Iraq?
No, like I said, I was in Ranger School as everybody started pouring into Kuwait, and for me, sitting in Ranger School, there's a part of me that wanted to just quit so I could be with my soldiers, and we got the speech saying, "Hey, they want you to graduate this school," and my leadership wrote back and said, "We want you. Worry about that. That is important. We'll pick you up when you get here." So I was fortunate to go through Ranger School the first time through, right into trying to link up with my unit from Baghdad International Airport. And I remember being on a ground assault convoy with no ammunition, with body armor, with no plates. So basically, a heavy piece of equipment that doesn't stop bullets. And slowly I picked up enough ammunition to fill 1 or 2 magazines before I finally linked up with Strike down in Mosul. At that point, the invasion brought the 101st to northern Iraq in Mosul. And we said, well, we have a better place for you. And I was stuck in 1377 Fit Artillery. And that's when I started my time not as a platoon leader, but really as a fire direction officer, but doing platoon leader type stuff. Because as you may recall, there's a point in time where we switched from doing fires to really doing infantry work with patrols and counter IED type stuff.
Okay, so they let you finish up Ranger School, which in the end became a great building block for the rest of your career.
Mm-hmm.
You got to Mosul after the ground invasion.
Yep.
Finally got some ammo. And then they put you on these non-standard missions that you guys weren't even trained for, and then said,
"Yep,
go."
Yep. Yeah. So with the ground invasion, I was at the tail end of the ground invasion until we officially transitioned. But all the big combined arms fight, I think at that point were pretty much over. But they were still, we were still moving into our forward operating bases, if you will. We say forward operating bases, but really we were still in, patrol bases. So we're, establishing those big battery level patrol bases where I finally linked up with 1377. And from there, I served some time as a fire direction officer and then eventually platoon leader / XO.
Can you describe the dangers you guys face day to day once you transitioned into post-invasion operations?
Okay. Yeah, so I think it was a lot easier, like I said, when I first got there, because you see bad folks and they were clearly identifiable, and you engaged, right? So you got a fire mission and you shot. So it was pretty simple. It's basically what we've kind of gone back to today with how we fight. But there's a period of time where the enemy started to retrograde and sort of integrate themselves back into the community. So, them wearing uniforms started to become out of the question. So that's when it started to get dangerous. And there's also that sense of, hey, we were victorious. So we all remember some of the things that were said on top of aboard a aircraft carrier, right? And there was that.
I think it was more displayed.
But in hindsight, that is probably where we entered the most dangerous part of our transition, right? Because at that point, we were already slowly transitioning into not quite counterinsurgency yet, but we're getting into that stability, because there is a fine line between that stability and counterinsurgency, right? And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
when it started to get dangerous, because you weren't also worried about the enemy. You were worried about complacency. So there's those two
Yeah.
things that we're doing. People would say, I want you to do presence patrols. Well, me coming fresh out of Ranger School, never believed in presence patrols. One, doctrinally, that wasn't a type of thing that we did. Two, that was very passive. So I'm happy to say that even at an early age that I said that we were doing combat patrols. But again, that's what I drew from Ranger School is, hey, what we're doing combat patrols. We do troop leading procedures, and we did combat patrols to look for the enemy. So the enemy at that time was less and less somebody with an AK-47, but they were people starting to lay IEDs, and to some extent, onesies and twosies, but we weren't at that point fighting big formations. So the fact that we had to discriminate who we shot at and who we engaged added a lot of complexity to what we did. And as you know, the smallest things or at the lowest level that we did had huge consequences for
Mm-hmm.
the bigger units.
You start out at Campbell, you and your wife, Courtney. She gets deployed to Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
You go to Ranger School. She deploys with the 101st also to Iraq.
Yep.
I mean, what a great first couple of years together, right? Did you guys get a chance to meet up at some point? Was that even possible?
Well, where there's a will, there's a way. But again, going back to some of the things that govern or help shape, my leadership style today is some of the things that I experienced as a young officer. And it was a very horrible time only because of the conflict. I didn't get to spend as much time with Courtney. And as you alluded to, she went to Afghanistan, came back, went to training, and then got ready to go to Iraq herself. Whereas my guys, we continued to train for Iraq. And then when Iraq came, we all went together. So her units, my units. I was in Ranger School for most of that. But once the big ground invasion occurred, and again, in hindsight, you see this, probably the most dangerous time was when it felt like, again, that things had slowed down. And again, at this point, you didn't know where the enemy was. But again, unbeknownst to me, we saw it as an opportunity to do some admin type stuff. And by admin, I don't really mean admin as in paperwork, but really to get some maintenance done. So our float gun, which is the gun, the spare gun, if you will, was located in a city called Talafar, which was more towards the Syrian border, and that's where Courtney's brigade was. So I was fortunate to have leaders who were also looking out for my welfare, because they too knew that most people got to see their families as they left for Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Ranger School, never saw my wife for a few months, and oh, by the way, we deployed, so more so we didn't get to see each other. Saw it as an opportunity for me to go pick up our foot gun and link it back up with the unit. But while I was there, because my wife was stationed there, it was also time for me to finally see my wife after months of training and the ground invasion, to finally link up with and see her. And I truly think had that not happened, that it probably would have put an even greater strain on our marriage at the time.
And this is a long time ago, before cell phones and
Right.
stable internet connection.
Yeah.
To keep in contact.
In context, I see the deployments now, and even my own to Poland, where I got, fast 4G hotspots that I carry in my pocket. Yeah, being able to see her was either that combat patrol or standing in line crossing my fingers that I would be able to get to her through one of those old switch type phones that we call the morale phones, right? That you had to stand in line for.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you were lucky and someone was willing to give you some of their satellite phone time, their government issued satellite phone time, that, you called her, and just so happens that her phone was plugged in and not turned off, because most people would turn on that phone only if they had to make a call. So there was no, like how we keep our cell phones on 24/7 these days, right? It was nothing like that.
Crazy. Okay, so post Iraq, you move up, you leave Fort Campbell. I assume you go to career course after that?
That's correct. Yep. So for me, it was a good opportunity to try something different. And I figured since we spent that time in Iraq doing infantry stuff, and you kind of saw the writing on the wall that we were going to be there for years after. And, clearly I got that right because we were in Iraq for a long time. And then when you add how much more time and we're still in Afghanistan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Going to the infantry career course, I thought at the time was a good opportunity. And they only selected 2 to 4 artillery officers a year. So I thought it was a discriminator in a good way. I think an opportunity to get some good training because I knew that as a captain later on, I would probably go back to Iraq or Afghanistan and do infantry instead of artillery stuff.
What was your assignment after the career course?
Oh, yeah. So El Paso, Texas. Got to Fort Bliss, and you may remember that Fort Bliss was primarily the home of the air defense artillery, and it was
full circle. You're back to it.
yeah, it's funny, right? I'm back in the air defense world, but we were the new folks in town, and these were those units of action where everybody came in as a cohort and went through the whole cycle, all the way to deployment, redeployment. And probably my best time where I had the best relationships. And again, that time was with the 1st Cavalry Division. It was the one brigade that was away from the flagpole.
Which brigade was that?
4th Brigade, 1st Cav. We did that for a few years, and then it switched over to 1st Armored Division.
When you showed up, it was a totally brand new unit, correct?
Oh, it was nothing. So I think my wife was one of the first few folks to arrive, and I told myself, man, I'm going to take my time. So I did some extra schooling at Fort Benning before I finally got to Fort Bliss. And at Fort Bliss, there was still only a few hundred of us. While I wish I got to go into command from the get-go like my wife did, I got there just as they selected the last captain for command, so I had to get in line. But, if I had to do it again, I think it was best that I did the route that I did take, which was serving as a logistics officer at the S4 as a staff officer. I got to learn about the unit, the capability gaps that we had as, transitioning from artillery to infantry. And I got to fill those capability gaps as a logistics officer. Eventually took command when the unit finally deployed for their rotation to Operation Iraqi Freedom 6. So I got to do a little bit of sustainment officer or logistics officer time in combat, but I'd say 12 of those months were as a battery commander in combat. And this was during the surge too, so it was an exceptionally long time overseas.
Where were you guys in Iraq this time?
Funny you ask. The same place. You tell yourself, I'm in a heavy unit. They'll send us to Baghdad. We won't go to the same place. But I guess it works out. I got to go back to exactly the AO that I became very familiar with. So it was kind of neat to be a commander there, having known the area like the back of my hand. And I still had, old maps and GPS coordinates to a lot of stuff. So it was like a reunion. So I guess it was a lot better that I was there versus anywhere else like Baghdad or Bakuba or any of those other places.
Hey, it was cool down in Baghdad. I was there.
Well, yeah.
The river was nice.
Yeah, there was some cooler stuff if you're in the green zone, that's for sure. But anywhere outside of the green zone was, yeah. So we were first told we were going to go to Ramadi. And I think someone said, hey, these new units of action are stood up from scratch. And they barely get to train with the equipment that they're going to fight with. So why would we send them to one of the worst spots in Iraq? So at that time, Mosul wasn't that bad. But as you recall, eventually all of that stuff, and till today, all of that stuff moved to Mosul. In fact, today is where we have a lot of our soldiers in that Mosul, northern Iraq area.
What were your duties as a commander in Iraq? Did you guys actually do your artillery mission, or was it a non-standard presence patrol type thing?
Absolutely my favorite deployment because I got to do both. I got to do artillery stuff with one gun, So I actually had paladins, and we trained on our paladins, but primarily we did infantry stuff. But as a commander, and just at the early part of the surge, we started off in Iraq, with a patrol base, and then we sort of went to those big FOBs, and we were leaving the FOBs, and we were kind of just staying on the FOBs and operating out of there. And as you recall, General Petraeus said, "Hey, we need to get out in the community. We have to establish, a series of these small combat outposts and be amongst the population if we were to win their hearts and minds, if you will." And it was a pleasure and an honor to be there at the onset of that, because I had experience with building patrol bases. I had been formally trained in the infantry maneuver career course, or the infantry career course. And I took the unit from operating within the Fort operating base to establishing 3 combat outposts. My area of operations was about the size of the state of Delaware. And for a small battery, occasionally a platoon of armor, that was quite an undertaking. That's where I really learned that you had to prioritize, and you prioritize based on your intel, and you actioned whatever intel you had. So you couldn't be everywhere at once. So counter ID, that was pretty impossible, but you could do it in pockets.
So about what do you say, about 100, 120 folks manning an area the size of Delaware?
Yeah. Shoot, let's say 130 to 150 max. On the times when I was weighed down with extra capabilities.
During this time, any particular story, unusual event, something super funny that you'd mind sharing?
Oh yeah. I mean, you go out there and you do your job, right? But the one thing that stands out is, my wife and I were also stationed there at the same time. And, again, I was lucky to have good leaders looking out for the fact that, we were the unusual dual military couples. Nowadays, you have so many of them. I just happen to know a lot of them now. I think they know that. And I'd like to think Courtney and I help make people realize that you can make it work out. But I know one Christmas, same thing. We didn't create a mission so we could put all the married couples together, but we did use one of our battle rhythm, if you will, our reoccurring missions, as an opportunity to get some of the married couples to meet up in the city of Mosul, where the big base was, where the most of the brigade was. So we were the one battalion at FOB Q West, so we were away from everybody. And of course, I had all the combat outposts, so we were more so away from everybody. We built a combat patrol, and we treated it like like any other patrol. Convoy briefs, rehearsals, good mix of heavy weapons, ensuring that we had air coverage, ensuring we had contingency plans in place for communications, all the different battle drills, if you will, what happens if you hit an IED. So, it was quite a deliberate plan that we put together, spreading out vehicles, having the right number of firepower. And I was able to visit my wife, who was at the tail end of her company command in Mosul. And fortunately, she was stationed there a lot closer than the first time we were in Iraq. And some of my other soldiers who are also married to other service members were able to spend their Christmas on Mosul. And again, not without any incident. Fortunately, our patrols weren't hit. Now, could that have happened? Yes, but we were trained and we were confident in our capabilities and our coverage. And it was during a period of time where we had fought pretty hard during the surge, and most of the pockets of insurgents that were there, we were able to quell during our time. So it's not like it was a tumultuous from what we were used to. It was a lot better time in the battle space, if you will, for us to be able to do this. So I hope they remember that they had a chance to do this. I've had a couple of these stints that I was able to meet my wife. But again, I've never done a mission just for that. It's just part of our recurring things that we did. And oh, by the way, since you're going to be there anyway, why not, right? Why not have a chance to see your spouse?
Who gave you guys tacit approval to make this idea happen? Do you know if it was your brigade commander, your battalion commander, or someone else on the higher staff?
Yeah, so, well, I'm not sure if the brigade commander knew about it. He may have, because the battalion commander surely knew about it. And, as busy as we are, sometimes we forget about, we don't always look at these opportunities. And not that the battalion commander wasn't busy, but he was looking out for his battery commanders. And, it was really, I wish I could take credit for that, but it was his idea that I spearheaded as the senior, next to the battalion commander and the majors, the senior guy on the ground, spearheaded the efforts. And, there's nothing that would have crushed me as if we just did a half-assed plan and get a bunch of people hurt. But again, it was a regular thing they were doing anyway. In fact, I would say we planned even more deliberately for our safety and our security to make this particular event happen.
Yeah, that's definitely an amazing story. Okay, so after your time as a captain, what were your first jobs or schooling opportunities as a major?
Well, just by going back and just talking about between the tour to Iraq and all the train up and not being able to see my wife, the Army was so nice enough to station us finally back home in Hawaii as a senior captain, junior major. But I will tell you the way we made that happen, because I remember asking Branch, hey, can I go to Hawaii? And they kind of laughed at me and said, we got other plans for you, like the National Training Center. And I was like,
yeah.
But in hindsight, it's an honor, right, that they want you to go there. But, life in the military, especially as a dual military family, and I talked about harmony versus balance. And you got to tell yourself, can I still progress my career and do good things? Not having to do that in that time and space. And we figured we went to combat. So what more do we have to do to prove ourselves? So Courtney had grad school and I did not because, had a crappy GPA. So I didn't even bother trying to apply for grad school. In hindsight, I should have, because I probably would have got it. Because in the military, we oftentimes base it on performance and potential, not really on your transcripts, right? And so Courtney, of course,
just meet the bare minimum, and then we'll get you
2.5, right? But Courtney was a lot more studious than I was, so she did grad school. So the plan we concocted was, hey, so your branch manager is telling you, wherever you apply to school and they accept you is where they're going to send you. So we're like, well, Hawaii has Hawaii Pacific University, Chaminade University, and the University of Hawaii. Hey, those are the three schools. And if we apply and you get accepted, that's where we're going to get stationed. So Courtney applied to those three Hawaii schools. So that way, regardless of the decision, we were going to Hawaii. And I was really, I was in pretty good with the Alumni Association at Hawaii Pacific University. And I remember it was taking a while and we were kind of desperate to go home finally. I called my friend who worked with Alumni Affairs and I said, I just needed an acceptance letter. My wife has a high GPA, and HP is not Harvard for Pete's sake, So, in about 2 hours or so, I get a letter in the email saying that Courtney was accepted to Hawaii Pacific University. And, we called Branch and Branch said, okay, guess you're going to Hawaii. Now, Ivan, we got to find you a job. And I remember telling him, don't worry about it. Let me make some calls and I'll get back to you. And, this is where I learned about being able to shape your own career and made some phone calls and ended up as a observer controller trainer, not in NTC, but in the 196 Infantry Training Brigade, which did X evals and NTC-like training, albeit not as big, to units in Hawaii. And so I still got that NTC-like training. And I got to go home. And because we're home, it was a great opportunity for us to start a family. So my 2 out of 3 boys were born in Hawaii as a result of us finally being stationed back.
That's great. And to be around family, which is, you mentioned earlier, is number one.
Absolutely.
Number one priority.
And, I will tell you, if out of that, the Army said, well, going to Hawaii, you were just shamming and screwing off, that you no longer have the potential to get promoted, I wouldn't have batted an eye. I would have said, okay, well, I'm in Hawaii, living the dream. I got, I started my family. That would have been good enough for me. But I'm glad that, because I still continued to do good work, albeit in Hawaii, and enjoying the beach and all that good weather, I still managed to get to where I am now.
Yes, that's a great point. Do great in whatever job you have, wherever you're at. So after Hawaii, where did your career take you?
Yes. So my KD time I did at the 3rd Infantry Division. Like I mentioned, as a senior captain going to Hawaii, I spent 1 year as the line of effort manager within the G3 shop, not the G5, doing training and exercises. Got to do some pretty cool traveling that I really, really, really enjoyed doing. I got to visit the Philippines, where I have family, for the first time in my life. And it was really hard to leave to go to ILE, the intermediate level education at Fort Leavenworth. Spent some time in Fort Leavenworth. Was able to get another master's degree while I was there, and ended up at the 3rd Infantry Division. We were asked by General Abrams and some folks to go there. And while we wanted to go back to Hawaii, we were told, hey, if someone asks for you, you probably might want to take that. And, Hawaii eventually asked for us, but we were already committed to 3rd ID. So we had to, much to our chagrin, we ended up going to the 3rd Infantry Division. I had the pleasure of working with General Abrams, which was fascinating in itself, given the family name. Courtney got...
You mean there's a tank named after him?
Exactly. And I thought it was the coolest thing that this commander has the Abrams tank named after his father in front of his division headquarters. And he would also talk about his father, and that was just fascinating. Now, his father passed away while he was a child, but he shares what little childhood memories he has of the great General Abrams. And, as you know, now he himself is a 4-star general in Korea. Mm-hmm. But I got to do that. Courtney got to work with her old boss that she worked with when she went to Afghanistan, Colonel Curtis. So she got to keep that relationship alive. And I got to go to Afghanistan as a planner, as a J5 planner. So a different kind of combat experience, being behind a desk. So it's a suckfest, only you don't get to do cool stuff, right? Suckfest being the deployment, and definitely don't get to go out on patrols. But
if you're in the G5, everyone thinks you're the big brainiac, though, right?
Yeah. That's what they assume. But it was kind of cool to be in the CJ5 or the G5 because, we try to be the extension of the commanding general. And General Abrams was a very smart, very decisive man. So it was really a good place to be in. We learned quite a bit. And because of that, I really think because of that, I really was able to serve my field grade time, my key and developmental time as a executive officer afterwards, because I was able to do some good things in the division headquarters.
So following Fort Stewart, what kind of cush job did you get after that?
Yeah, I wish it was a cush, but I will tell you, because part of what we did at Fort Stewart, which was, converting the unit from an armor brigade combat team to a infantry brigade combat team, that also ended my time there because there's nowhere else for me to go. So I had to make some calls and, once again, influence my own career. And we found ourselves in the office of the chief legislative liaison. Courtney got offered some really cool jobs. And at the end, we kind of had to give the ultimatum and say, hey, well, I appreciate that you're giving me this opportunity to work here, but we are a pair. And both Courtney and I were able to both work in the office of the chief legislative liaison. She got to work on the Hill, with the office on the Hill. So while we both worked with members of Congress, she actually worked on the Senate, in the Senate building, rather. I worked a portfolio and programs, so I got to work with both the Senate and the House Armed Services Committee. And definitely, we thought, all right, we'll take a knee after our KD time, and not the case. Those hours were, so I will say this. Hours were bad, but because Congress, without a doubt, went on recess during the summer and the winter, I did get to use 30 days leave a year
Wow.
without batting an eye, without caring like I was letting the team down. So during the summer when Congress took off, unless we were traveling, we used congressional recess to ourselves take some time off with the kids. But, one of the underlying themes that I will say is, even though we've had kids from when we were majors, with the exception of deployments, I haven't missed a key part of their life, whether it's a birthday or a recital or any of that stuff. And that is what made my time in OCLL busy, because I wanted to make sure that I had that life harmony.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's busy, it's self-induced, but it kept the family together, and that's more important than anything else.
Can you describe the preparation you went through after you learned you were going to be a battalion commander? What process did you go through to mentally and intellectually prepare yourself for that role?
Yeah, so I guess you could say we're the lucky crew, because we were the battalion commanders before we moved into this battalion command selection process. And having, as you mentioned, having spent 2 years working with Congress, 1 year with the White House, I was very disconnected from the tactical operational level of war. So, from when you realize that it's going to become real once again, you had to shift your focus, even though it's hard, because so I was lucky that in the White House, because it was at the highest level of government, no one really tells you what to do. It's the other way around, right? You tell people you need things and things get done for you. So my hours there for my last year in DC was very good. I had a very good mentor who happens to be, one of the few Asia Pacific Islanders in the White House, but a really good mentor. And he understood, how busy things were for Army officers, and he understood our developmental path.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very accommodating. He was very mindful about where I came from and where I was going. And I had a lot of time to be able to reflect on my career up to then and mentally prepare myself for battalion command. Most people, like some of my peers, would stress about, hey, when can I fit in, go into the pre-command course, because I got all this stuff going on. And I can tell you that, I didn't stress at all, because I knew I had the support of the people I worked with.
Yeah.
And they knew. And yes, it was hard for the 2 weeks that I had to go to training, but they were like, hey, don't worry about it. We built redundancy in what we do. And again, it helps that when you're at the highest level of government that, with this exception and Congress doesn't really tell them what to do either, right? So, I didn't have to feel too bad when I disconnected for 2 weeks. But the 2 weeks is where I recommend, soldiers to really soak in that pre-command course. For those that have to go to the BCAP program, it's one thing to prepare yourselves to get selected for command. And it's another thing where you are selected now, and, what are you doing to set the conditions for a successful battalion command? And that 2 weeks is where, it's all those things leading up to that, but it's really 2 weeks where you're not worried about Army stuff. You're not worried about soldiers. You're not worried about deliverables. You're worried about yourself for a change. And to use those 2 weeks and ask questions and, do some reflection, do some writing. I try to do a lot of journaling, and, I started writing about things that were going in my mind. I started writing about command philosophy. But also at the same time, I started rereading a lot of those field manuals to get back to the craft. And as your listeners will probably pick up, is I did a lot of infantry stuff. And now the Army has shifted back to large-scale ground combat operations. So now I had to not only go back to what I did at tactical level, but to switch my mindset from that maneuver infantry-like stuff to being an artillery guy once again. And that's where I had to really draw upon my experience as an enlisted soldier doing fire support or forward observer work, and think about the kind of support I needed as a soldier and what I expected a battalion commander to provide me as a soldier, to, what kind of training soldiers need to be effective at their job. Because as a battalion commander, you're the maestro. You're you're not an expert on all of those things, but you need to know how all of those come together to create that masterpiece. And that masterpiece is providing fire support for that brigade commander. But again, I was lucky between that 2 weeks of going to the pre-command course and just worried, finally just thinking about myself. But, from when you're realizing that you're competitive for command is just going back to the books. A lot of guys will spend some time reading these philosophical books and Germany and, all that stuff. But you really got to get back to cracking open field manuals, Army regulations, and just getting yourself into that mindset. Again, easy for the guys who left their KD time as a major and stayed tactical. Again, I found myself fortunate to spend some time at the strategic level because there are some ramifications for future opportunities past the Army or even in the senior levels of the Army.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it was an uphill battle. I was just lucky that I had understanding leaders in the White House that afforded me the time to do the self-reflection needed to reread myself, if you will, on artillery stuff.
Yeah.
And so when I took command, I confidently was ready to lead soldiers again at the tactical level and eventually take them to Poland and back here to the U.S.
What battalion did you take command of, and where was it located at?
Oh, I've been blessed in my career, and the battalion that I took, and the timing couldn't be more impeccable, was the 1st Battalion, 5th Foot Artillery. And while most people will hear that and go like, okay, it is Hamilton's own. It was once commanded by Alexander Hamilton, and I say that it's timely.
Who is that?
Alexander Hamilton. Right. So, for everyone that has Disney Plus, right, you can watch the Hamilton musical, and anytime he talks about cannons, we can link that history back to the battalion that I commanded, the 1st Battalion, 5th Foot Artillery, Hamilton's own. It is the oldest unit in the military on active duty.
Given, I guess, that illustrious lineage of being one of the oldest artillery units in the Army today, did you incorporate any of that into your time in as command or any of the events you guys held?
Oh, absolutely. So I think the 1st Infantry Division, and if someone is from there, I don't know if they might want to punch me in the face, but I honestly think everyone knows the 82nd Airborne, right? Everybody knows the 101st Airborne. 1st Infantry, sort of, but it should be the most well-known division in the Army. It is the oldest division with the oldest brigade, and of course, having my unit as the oldest in the military on active duty. Now, there are National Guard units that are the same, but again, they haven't been on active duty, right? But that is something that all soldiers should be proud of. So my challenge as a commander was not only the readiness piece that my senior leaders asked of me, but for soldiers to understand the gravity of the unit that they belong to. To make them feel proud that, hey, that guy on the $10 bill, he commanded this unit. That musical that everyone's talking about on Disney Plus,
mm-hmm.
that's this unit. The Army song was created by a guy, well, what eventually became the Army song, by a guy in this unit. So be proud of that, because sometimes it's hard. It's as busy as it is at the tactical level, and myself included. When I was a young soldier, it's easy to just say, "Man, it sucks being here. This sucks. That sucks. Man, it's a lot of hard work, late hours." But it does make it easier when you can draw upon just the lineage and the rich history that the unit has. And it was important for me to promote that with the unit. So the way we did that was to celebrate every year on the 6th of January. And again, we've been activated since 6th January 1776. But every 6th January to celebrate that. And we did that with a streamer ceremony where we talked about every campaign that the unit was a part of. And no other unit has the number of streamers, other than the Army itself, than this little battalion. And really, it's a battery, right, that this started from. But all lineage from the battalion, you can't just segregate it, right? So it is the history of the battalion at large. But it was an important piece for me for soldiers to be proud of their unit. And the one thing that I messaged to them was, I want to feed you with so much stuff that you may not realize it now, but when you leave, you're going to look back and be like, man, wow, it was a special experience. But more importantly, was I actually told them that, that feeling that you get after you leave the unit, I want you to have that sense of pride now. It was challenging, but I do think most will probably feel that after they leave. But, social media is how we try to get after that besides our events. We try to, I had a great lieutenant, and again, talent management, right? You find the folks who love to do things and you just have them run with it. And I had what hopefully will soon be a West Point history professor, young lieutenant, and now captain.
Don't they all want to be?
Right. But he loved it, and he was even more so enamored with being at the 1st Infantry Division and the 1st Armored Brigade Combat Team and in this unit. So he would do a This Day in History. And I don't know if you had a chance to see some of those posted, but he would always say, in this day in history, Hamilton serving next to, as the aide to then General Washington, et cetera, et cetera. And it was always fascinating. And prior to getting to the unit, there was so much history. It was very helpful that he was doing all these social media posts to share with everybody in bite-sized pieces, what this unit's history was.
Yeah, I try to explain it in my first episode. One of the key areas I want to explore with this podcast is it's not just, veteran stories and people doing history, but telling the stories of the units and the stories that matter. Like you explained, it's important because everything in the Army, it changes. It changes so much. Even, talking with you, just two of the major units that you were a part of, 1377 and 4th Brigade, 1st Cav, on paper, those units don't exist anymore.
Right.
So those stories, that lineage, that pride of being in the unit, it has to be carried on by us that served in those units and continue to tell the stories.
I would tell the soldiers, I'd open up, the many speeches you do as a battalion commander. But, like in academia, we say that we stand on the shoulder of giants. So I would use that line with my soldiers and tell them, there's so much more to why you exist here today. And, there is so much here to digest that they should be absolutely proud to say that they were a part of. But what's most exciting now is, we've realized that, a lot of skills have atrophied. A lot of our technology has become out of date. And I am very happy to hear that we've made fires a priority for the Army. And, part of that you could see with the battalion that I just left. We tested and fielded the first new howitzer from the ground up, not just a upgrade, but, a brand new howitzer. The last time we had a new howitzer was in the 1960s. The last time we had new armored vehicles were in the 80s. So to finally have, outside of the Striker, of course, to finally have a true armored vehicle in the 109 Alpha 7 howitzer is awesome. And then that will eventually become the extended range cannon artillery, the IRCA. So it was awesome history, and in addition to being in the oldest unit that this unit had. But that's just the surface of all the capabilities that we're going to have in the future. We're talking about extending the range of the ATACMs. We're talking about, again, the extended range cannon artillery, the IRCA, shooting 70 kilometers with artillery. So that now you have a long range system that can shoot as far as the older multiple launch rocket system in a cheap cannon shell. You have cannon shells that can shoot hypersonic rounds and intercept cruise missiles. And that was a successful test just a few weeks ago. You got so much technology coming in. I'm jealous because I'm at the tail end of my career. And these are some great things that are coming out. And I
remember just thinking, hey, we have a FATADs in a computer now, in the FDC. That was like
with a color screen, and it's not green and black. It's high definition computer screen.
Oh yeah, I was in the 17th Field Artillery Brigade as a major. 1377 was there, and they had one of the old 198s, and I'd walk past it and, I told some of the lieutenants walking by, hey, I was on this as a platoon leader. And they're like, damn,
Whoa.
sir, you're old. I'm like,
Yeah. Yep. And the 777s, 1377 tested that with the Marines, as you recall.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Having 29 palms.
Yeah. So between that and then again, my unit doing the 109 Alpha 7. Wow. What a but those things are all new. But it's exciting, and it's not just for the, I will give my air defense artillery brethren a shout out because I work in their community now. They're getting a ton of capabilities too, like their modifications to the Patriot, and just the having the Patriot now intercept ballistic missiles, phenomenal. So there's a lot of technology, and again, I'm a bit jealous because we're at the high point of all kinds of cool stuff coming in. But again, I would be at the tail end because I won't be the guy playing with the new technology and employing it as much. But the new generations coming in are having some cool things, to include cell phone like computers that processes fire missions. Yeah, that big AFATANs that we were just talking about now in pocket size.
Yeah, it's crazy. Don't we just wish that?
Yeah.
Reflecting a little bit on your military career, you've been through a lot the last 2.5 decades. You've been there, enlisted soldier, junior officer, as a light fighter in major combat operations. You've seen the transition to non-standard missions in the artillery community, and then taking the long road back to relearning those core artillery tasks of what it means to be a artilleryman. Now, as a senior member of the fires community, how do you see the new generation of artillerymen and women, carrying the torch forward into the future?
No, I can tell you, I'm absolutely proud of where we are today. And and you hit the nail on the head with artillerymen and women, because truly, we can truly benefit from the best of everyone, right? It's not about, well, you can't be the best because of your race, creed, color, or sex. It's now, if you're the best, then you can become the best. And we all benefit from that. And that's an important thing to have. As a battalion commander, I just started to get in females in MOSs that, I never saw growing up. 13 Fox females. I started to see more in FDC. And, I will tell you, the best fire direction officers that I had were females. So again, it's all about having the best because they're the best, not because they're the best, but because they're not of the right, race, creed, or color, or sex, that they really can't. So we benefit as an organization because of that.
Are there any final thoughts on leadership you'd like to share before we finish up?
I think one of the main things, especially for the young leaders that have the opportunity to listen to this, is, as you go through your career, the Army becomes a better organization when we take the lessons that we learn and we try to affect change where we can, instead of following the status quo. I'll go back to, there's the Fort Hood report that came out. And, we say that's a cultural thing because it was of, generations past that we've come up to this point now. But for our young leaders, they learn so many lessons along the way. It's up to them to affect change where they can. And this history allows us to reflect on some of those things. And this is why it's important for us to understand history, is because there are going to be some points that we can learn from these things and try not to repeat it.
Lieutenant Colonel Iven Sugai, thank you, my friend, for joining us.
Hey, Gabe, it's been my pleasure. And we definitely have to catch up outside of the podcast and chat more about how your family's doing and so on and so forth.
Most definitely. I'll talk to you soon. If you like what you've heard and would like to support our podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast player you're listening to us on. The positive reviews help others find the show. Please visit our website at campironmountain.com and subscribe to our email list. On our website, you will also find the links to join our private Facebook group and other social media sites. Stop by and leave a comment, ask questions, or provide ideas for future podcasts. Join our efforts to preserve the important memories of our veterans and civilians for future generations.